The desert wind howled like a wounded animal, whipping sand across the cracked asphalt of Route 66's forgotten stretch. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour where the stars hung low and indifferent, casting a pale glow over the wreckage of a life unraveling. In the shadow of a rusted diner sign, flickering like a dying heartbeat, a small boy, no more than 8, huddled against the wall. His thin frame shaking not just from the chill, but from the terror etched into his wide eyes. His clothes were torn, dirt-streaked, and he clutched a crumpled drawing to his chest as if it were the only shield against the world. Footsteps echoed from the darkness, heavy and deliberate, belonging to shadows that loomed larger with each step. 2 men, rough-hewn and reeking of cheap whiskey, closed in, their laughter a guttural snarl that promised no mercy. The boy pressed back, whispering pleas to no one, his voice lost in the wind. The roar shattered the night like thunder cracking open the sky. A single headlight pierced the gloom, growing into a beast of chrome and leather as Ethan Hale thundered into the parking lot on his battered Harley. At 42, Ethan was a relic of roads long traveled, his arms inked with stories he never voiced, his face weathered by sun and sorrow. He'd been riding aimlessly since dusk, chasing ghosts from a war that had claimed too much, when the diner's faint light pulled him off the highway. Now he killed the engine with a flick of his wrist, the sudden silence amplifying the boy's whimpers and the men's curses. Ethan swung off the bike, boots crunching gravel, his leather jacket creaking like old leather under strain. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a wall of quiet menace, eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a man who'd seen hell and ridden out the other side. The men turned, sizing him up. "Mind your business, old man," the taller one growled, stepping forward with fists clenched. Ethan didn't flinch. He glanced at the boy, saw the fear raw and unfiltered, and something stirred deep in his chest, an echo of a promise made decades ago, buried under layers of regret. "Walk away," Ethan said, voice low and steady, like the rumble of an idling engine. They laughed again, but it was forced now, brittle. The shorter one lunged, but Ethan sidestepped with the grace of someone who'd danced this dance before, grabbing the man's arm and twisting just enough to drop him to his knees. The other hesitated, then bolted into the night, leaving his companion groaning in the dust. Ethan released him with a shove. "Tell your friends this stretch ain't for the likes of you." The man scrambled up and fled, the wind swallowing his retreat. Kneeling beside the boy, Ethan softened his edges, the lines around his eyes deepening with concern. "Hey, kid, you all right?" The boy looked up, tears carving clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. He didn't speak at first, just stared at Ethan's arm where the jacket's sleeve had ridden up, revealing the edge of a tattoo. A faded sketch of a soaring eagle clutching a broken chain, wings spread in defiant flight. The boy's hand trembled as he reached out, fingers tracing the lines with a reverence that stopped Ethan's breath. "I drew that," the boy whispered, voice cracking like dry earth. Ethan's world tilted. The ink had been etched into his skin 20 years ago, a tribute to a fallen brother in arms, designed by a child he'd met only once, in a moment he'd tried to forget. The diner's door creaked open, spilling warm yellow light onto the lot. An elderly waitress, her apron stained with coffee and thyme, poked her head out. "Saw the commotion. You two come inside. I'll call someone." Ethan nodded, scooping the boy up gently, the child's small weight an anchor pulling at memories long chained. As they stepped into the warmth of the diner, the smell of frying bacon and stale pie mingling with the metallic tang of fear, Ethan set the boy on a stool. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated, clutching his drawing, a mirror of the tattoo, smudged but unmistakable. "I'm Lucas," he said finally, eyes darting to Ethan's face as if searching for recognition. "And you're the man from the stories, the one who promised." Ethan's heart hammered, a drumbeat of the past rising. He'd made that promise in the dim glow of a hospital room, to a dying friend named Marcus, Lucas's father, a fellow Marine who'd pulled Ethan from the jaws of an ambush in some god-forsaken valley. Marcus, bleeding out on a cot, had pressed a sketch into Ethan's hand, drawn by his 4-year-old son during visiting hours. "Keep this safe," Marcus had rasped, "and watch over him if I don't make it." Ethan had nodded, the weight of it crushing, but life had pulled him away. Guilt, the road, the club he'd built as a shield against the pain. Iron vow, they called it, a brotherhood forged in the fires of loss. But he'd let that vow slip through his fingers like desert sand. Now here was the boy, grown a little, but marked by the same shadows, alone and hunted. As the waitress poured coffee with hands that shook only slightly, Ethan sat across from Lucas, the boy's drawing spread between them like a map to buried treasure. "How'd you end up out there?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone even, though inside storms brewed. Lucas's eyes dropped. "They took me, said my dad owed them from before. I ran when they stopped here." The words hung heavy, laced with the innocence of survival. Ethan thought of the tattoo, now a bridge across years, and felt the old promise ignite like embers fanned to flame. This wasn't coincidence, it was reckoning. Outside, his bike gleamed under the neon sign, waiting. But Ethan knew one ride wouldn't suffice. He'd need the club, the family he'd chosen, scattered across state lines but bound by oaths deeper than blood. The waitress returned with a blanket, draping it over Lucas's shoulders. "Sheriff's on his way, but roads are bad tonight." Ethan nodded, but his mind raced ahead. Corruption festered in these parts. Whispers of badges bought and turned blind eye to the predators prowling the fringes. If Lucas's abductors were tied to that web, calling the law might entangle them deeper. No, this called for justice of another kind, the quiet, unyielding kind that honored the fallen. As Lucas traced the tattoo again, his small finger following the eagle's wing, Ethan made a silent vow to amend the old one. "You're safe now," he said, and meant it. But safety was just the start. Dawn would break soon, and with it, the road to redemption, pulling Ethan's world and the iron vow into a ride that would test every scar, every secret, and every shred of loyalty he had left. The neon buzz of the diner sign hummed like a distant swarm of insects, casting erratic shadows across the Formica counter where Ethan sat, his calloused fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee. Steam rose in lazy curls, carrying the bitter scent that mingled with the faint, greasy aroma of leftover hash browns from the grill. Lucas huddled under the blanket, his small body still trembling faintly, though the warmth of the place had begun to chase away the night's chill. The boy's eyes, wide and shadowed, flicked between Ethan's face and the tattoo peeking from his sleeve, as if the ink held the key to unlocking some long-sealed door. Ethan felt the weight of that gaze, a mirror reflecting the failures he'd buried under miles of blacktop and the roar of engines. "Tell me more about those men," Ethan said softly, his voice a low rumble that cut through the quiet hum of the diner's ancient refrigerator. He leaned forward, elbows on the counter, the leather of his jacket whispering against the worn stool. Lucas shifted, pulling the blanket tighter, his voice emerging in hesitant fragments. "They came to our house 2 days ago. Said Dad borrowed money from the wrong people before. Before he was gone, they wanted me to make it right." The words hung in the air, laced with a child's confusion over debts that spanned graves. Ethan's jaw tightened, the muscles along his neck coiling like springs under strain. Marcus had never mentioned debts, only the war, the brotherhood. And that final sketch pressed into Ethan's palm like a sacred relic. But life after the service had a way of twisting men into knots, and Ethan knew the shadows of those knots all too well. The waitress, whose name tag read Doris, slid a plate of toast toward Lucas, her eyes kind but weary, etched with the lines of too many late nights witnessing roadside tragedies. "Eat up, sugar. Can't think on an empty stomach." As the boy nibbled tentatively, the crust crunching softly under small teeth, Ethan pulled out his phone from the inner pocket of his jacket. The screen glowed harsh in the dim light, illuminating the faint scars on his knuckles, reminders of bar fights and border skirmishes long past. He scrolled to a group chat labeled Iron Vow, the icon a simple chain link. Unbroken. 20 years ago, he'd founded the club in a dusty garage on the outskirts of Reno, a haven for vets like him, bound by codes stricter than any military oath. They'd ridden for causes that mattered, escorting kids to hospitals, clearing debris from storm-torn towns, standing sentinel against the creeps who preyed on the vulnerable. But personal promises, those were sacred. Unspoken weights each man carried alone. His thumb hovered over the send button. A message to the crew would summon them like wolves to a howl. Bikers from dusty lots in Arizona to rain-slicked bars in Oregon, engines firing up under starlit skies. But this wasn't just any call. It was a ghost rising from the sand. Ethan typed, "Need eyes on Route 66, mile marker 147. Kid in trouble. Odette tied to Marcus Reed. Rally at dawn if you're in." He hit send before doubt could creep in, the whoosh of the message echoing his resolve. Pocketing the phone, he looked at Lucas, who had set the toast aside, his fingers now idly sketching on a napkin with a pilfered crayon from the counter. The lines formed an eagle, wings unfurling, a chain snapping at its talons. Echoes of the tattoo, raw and alive. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the diner's windows like impatient knuckles. Headlights sliced through the darkness, not the steady flash of sheriff's lights, but erratic beams from a battered pickup that skidded into the lot. Ethan's instincts sharpened. He rose slowly, hand instinctively brushing the hidden holster at his belt, a habit from days when trust was a luxury. Two figures emerged from the truck, silhouettes against the glare. The shorter man from earlier, nursing a bruised arm, and a third, broader, with a limp that spoke of old injuries. They scanned the lot, eyes locking on Ethan's Harley, then the diner door. Doris froze mid-pour, coffee dribbling over the mug's rim. "Trouble," she whispered. Ethan placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, guiding him behind the counter with a nod to Doris. "Stay low, kid, this'll pass." But as the door swung open with a chime that mocked the tension, Ethan stepped forward, blocking the view. The shorter man spat on the threshold, his companion's face twisted in a scowl. "You the one who stuck your nose in? That boy's ours, collateral for what his old man owed the boss." "Doom," the words dripped with false authority, the kind bought with bribes and backroom deals. Ethan didn't move, his stance a quiet barrier, eyes steady as desert horizons. Debts die with the debtor. Kids got no part in it. The broader one advanced, his breath heavy with the sour tang of unwashed clothes and desperation. "You don't know who you're messing with. Sheriff's in our pocket, whole town's wired tight. A flicker of corruption's shadow, the kind that poisoned small places like this, turning law into leash." Ethan's mind raced to the Iron Vows code. No badges bought our loyalty. He'd seen it before, cops turning blind to human trafficking disguised as family business, vultures circling the lost. But violence wasn't the answer. It never was. "Walk out," Ethan said, voice even, laced with the steel of earned respect, "or explain it to my brothers when they roll in at first light." The threat hung, unspoken engines already revving in distant garages. The men exchanged glances, the shorter one's bravado cracking like thin ice. They backed toward the door, muttering curses that dissolved into the night. As the truck peeled away, gravel spitting like angry sparks, Ethan exhaled, the tension easing from his shoulders. He turned to Lucas, who peeked from behind the counter, eyes wide but holding a spark of something new. Trust, fragile as morning mist. "They're not coming back tonight," Ethan assured him, though he knew the road ahead twisted with more shadows. Doris locked the door, her hands steadier now. "Sheriff will be here soon enough. But you..." "You look like you've got a plan." Ethan nodded, glancing at his phone as replies lit the screen. "On my way. Vow holds." The club stirred, a machine awakening. Dawn crept closer, painting the horizon in bruised purples, the scent of dew-kissed sage drifting through the cracks. Ethan sat beside Lucas, watching the boy finish his sketch. The eagle now perched on a road stretching into infinity. This promise, renewed, would bind them all. Father's ghost, son's innocence, and a brotherhood's unyielding ride. But as the first siren wailed faintly in the distance, Ethan wondered if the law's arrival would aid or ensnare, testing the moral lines he'd sworn to uphold. The coffee grew cold in his mug, a silent witness to the turning point. Ethan traced the tattoo himself, feeling the raised lines like braille of fate. Lucas's words echoed, "You're the man from the stories." And now the story unfolded anew, pulling Ethan from solitude into the fray, where loyalty wasn't just ink on skin, but fire in the veins. And now, waited at a nondescript warehouse on the city's edge, a neutral ground she'd secured, her agency's clean hands a counterweight to the local rot. As the convoy turned onto a cracked industrial street, lined with chain-link fences rattling in the breeze, Ethan felt the vow's full gravity, not just protection, but the unearthing of buried injustices, honoring Marcus by freeing his son from chains forged in shadows. Lucas's small hand gripped the sidecar's edge, his voice rising above the traffic's hum. "Are we there? Will it be over?" Ethan nodded, the sun glinting off his helmet's visor as he pulled into the warehouse lot. A vast expanse of weathered concrete dotted with loading docks and forgotten pallets. The group dismounted in a synchronized hush, boots echoing on the pavement, the scent of oil and rust heavy in the still air. Elena emerged from a side door, her frame athletic under a plain jacket, badge clipped discreetly to her belt. She clasped Ethan's hand firmly, her eyes, sharp and assessing, flicking to Lucas with a warmth that eased the boy's tension. "You made good time. Inside, we've got privacy." Samuel handed over the ledger as they filed into the dim interior, the space echoing with the faint drip of a leaky pipe and the musty undertone of stacked crates. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh pools of yellow that highlighted the group's weathered faces, each man a silent testament to roads traveled for causes unspoken. Elena spread the pages on a metal table, her fingers tracing entries with clinical precision, the paper crinkling softly under her touch. "This ties it together." Marcus uncovered their operation. Coerced relocations, families leveraged like assets. Tate's signatures buried the complaints. Murmurs rippled through the vow, Jax's scarred cheek tightening as Ryan nodded grimly. Lucas stood on tiptoe beside Ethan, peering at the scrawled lines, his presence a quiet anchor amid the revelations. Ethan watched, the tattoo on his arm itching faintly, as if the eagle sensed the nearing flight. This was the moral fulcrum, not a raid, but exposure. The power of documented truth, dismantling the web without a single raised fist. "Marcus tried to walk clean," Ethan said, voice steady as the warehouse's concrete floor. "They made sure he couldn't, for his boy." But the air shifted with a distant whine. Engines, multiple, approaching fast from the street. Elena's radio crackled, her expression hardening. Backups delayed, traffic jam on the interstate. Kane must have anticipated. Through the grimy windows, shadows lengthened as 3 black SUVs screeched into the lot, doors flying open to disgorge Kane and his crew, faces set in desperate resolve, the sun casting their outlines like invaders from a bad dream. Tate's cruiser idled at the rear, a reluctant sentinel, its lights flashing sporadically as if signaling internal conflict. Kane strode forward, flanked by 4 men whose postures screamed hired muscle, the wind carrying the sharp tang of their urgency. Sweat and cheap cologne mingling with the city's smog. "No more games, Hale," Kane barked, halting at the chain-link gate, his voice echoing off the warehouse walls. "The boys coming with us. Those papers, shredded before they see light." Ethan stepped to the door, the vow forming a loose line behind him, leather creaking like a collective breath held. Lucas pressed close, his hand finding Ethan's, the sketch's memory a spark of defiance. Elena moved to Ethan's side, phone in hand, already dialing reinforcements. "Federal ground, Kane. Stand down or you're done." The boss's right hand sneered, but doubt flickered in his eyes. The ledger's exposure loomed like a guillotine, promising indictments that would unravel his empire. Tate emerged from his cruiser, hat in hand, his face etched with the wear of choices ill-made. "Victor, call it off," the sheriff muttered, voice low but carrying on the breeze. It's bigger than us now." Kane whirled on him, betrayal flashing hot. "You sold out your own town." The standoff pulsed with ethical tension, the air thick as the moments before a desert rain. Kane's men shifted uneasily, hands hovering but not drawing, the weight of witnesses. 20 vow riders, Elena's badge, the ledger's irrefutable ink, tipping the scales. Jax's rumble cut through. "Walk away. Honor's not for sale." Lucas, emboldened, stepped forward slightly, holding up an imaginary sketch. "My dad said promises win." The words, simple and pure, pierced the fray like sunlight through clouds, cracking Kane's facade. He glanced at Tate, then the unyielding wall of brotherhood, realization dawning that his bribes couldn't buy silence from men bound by deeper oaths. With a curse swallowed by the wind, Kane signaled retreat, his crew piling back into the SUVs, tires squealing as they fled the lot, dust swirling in their wake. Tate lingered a beat, meeting Ethan's gaze, regret mingling with resolve, before sliding into his cruiser and following, the flashing lights fading into the urban sprawl. Elena exhaled, securing the warehouse door with a decisive click. "They're breaking. Warrants are issuing as we speak. Your proof sealed it." The group dispersed into quiet relief, hands clasping in silent victory, the air lighter now, scented with the faint ozone of cleared tension. Ethan knelt to Lucas, the boy's eyes shining with a mix of awe and closure. "It's over, kid. Your dad's promise. Kept." Lucas hugged him fiercely, the embrace a bridge across years, mending the scars of absence with chosen family. The vow gathered around, Jax ruffling the boy's hair, Ryan offering a thumbs up, Samuel's nod profound as a benediction. This was redemption's quiet forge, not in glory, but in the fulfillment of words etched in ink and memory, justice moral and unyielding against corruption's tide. As the sun dipped toward evening, casting the warehouse in amber hues, Elena arranged safe passage for Lucas, a temporary home with a vow-affiliated family until permanency could be woven from truth's threads. Ethan watched the boy mount a borrowed bike with Samuel, the engines purr, a promise of new horizons. The convoy reformed for the ride out, engines igniting in a symphony of renewed purpose, the city shrinking in rear views like a conquered shadow. Ethan rode last, the eagle on his skin no longer a ghost but a living emblem, wings spread in the wind's embrace. The road stretched endless, but for the first time in years, it led not to escape, but home, forged in loyalty, scarred by sacrifice, eternal in honor. Thank you for riding along on this journey of promises kept and chains broken. If these tales of brotherhood and redemption resonate with you, hit that subscribe button and join the Iron Vow family for more stories from the open road.